Thank you, Jim. Moving on to item number 7. There's a presentation by David Wardlow. David, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much. For the record, David Wardlow, Program Manager here at HGAC. We are going to continue our discussion with you about our 10-year plan coming out of the 2015 call for projects. We hope this will be your last major action regarding this effort, and at the end of this, we're going to seek your approval of the 10-year plan. I did want to highlight for you just a slight correction. The letter that was passed out to you that was sent to us from MUD 191 in Harris County is in regards to one of the projects that is included in the 10-year plan. I will highlight for you they are in active discussions with the department regarding this project. The proposed scope of this project on 1960 reflects really the ultimate work with the department identified as the best alternative. So it's no longer a grade separation at the railroad. This is a smaller scoped project, and there's not yet an environmental finding, and the design is not yet complete. So there's additional time to work with the department to resolve the issues that they have identified. All right. So where are we in this process? Again, we talked to you last month about this list, and in fact, the 10-year list that we're bringing to you today are unchanged from what we previewed with you last month. We have gone through the scoring and ranking process based on the criteria that you all adopted at the beginning of our call for projects. We've determined the eligibility of these projects, matched them up with the remaining phases of work that are necessary to bring them to implementation, and have really matched all that up to develop a fundable 10-year list of projects. We have considered the effect of Proposition 7 funding on this list, so we really have two scenarios that are included in the 10-year plan, one that includes Proposition 7 funding, and one that would exclude it should voters not approve it in the next several weeks. As I mentioned, we've included the scoring and ranking, readiness information, funding eligibility, and the availability of funds based on the allocation guidance that this body approved several calls ago. Just a brief update on the available funds that we're talking about. In total, we are looking at programming up to about $5 billion in funds over the next 10 years. As a reminder, we're looking to program fully or 100% of the funds in the first 5 years. This would take us through FY 2020 and make sure that when we adopt the next TIP this spring, that document will be fully programmed at that time. We're looking to program about 50% of the funds in the latter 5 years. This would allow us some flexibility when circumstances and priorities change, and make sure that we can continue our process of having calls, selecting those activities roughly every 2 years. I will highlight for you the top section of this is what's subject to the Policy Council guidance that I referred to. That's about $1 billion, just over $1.1 billion for the 10-year period. The remaining 3 categories there, Category 2, that's a federal program from TxDOT. Proposition 1, and those are the severance tax receipts that are deposited in the State Highway Fund. And then the potential for Proposition 7, transfers from sales tax. Those are all dedicated to basically on-system, on-state highway system, highway projects. And they would total about $3.8, $3.9 billion. That gets us to the $5 billion figure. And I would also, like just as I mentioned, the second 5 years, that leaves about $2 to $2.5 billion for future project selection in this time period. We showed you these maps last month, but I think they're helpful to illustrate the progress that we're able to make with these various funding scenarios. The first map is all the projects that were submitted and considered as candidate projects in this call. That is roughly a $3 billion nominal request, and that is just the funds that were requested, not match, and in current year dollars. That does not include any inflation that we tack on those projects 3 or 5 years out from the date of request. And so all the rest is what's requested. If we are limited to current funding resources, again, excluding Proposition 7, we are still able to accomplish a number of major projects in our area. This would allow us to complete 59 South, bringing that up to interstate standard in our 8-county area, all the way down the county line. We would continue the reconstruction of 45 South. That would get us to Texas City Y. We would fully reconstruct the 59-610 interchange here, just south of the Galleria area, and it would include $128 million based on the Policy Council's guidance for transit and bicycle pedestrian, those alternative mode projects. If If we add in Proposition 7, however, you can see most of the red really goes away. What remains are largely some, at least on the map, largely some pretty long and significant bicycle pedestrian projects that still up there. There's a couple of there's a transit project that is not yet funded as well. And this would allow us to continue some major highway projects, again, Proposition 7. So 45 South, all the way to the island would be reconstructed. A number of state highways could be included in this scenario. State Highway 36, that's a very long corridor. Gets you all the way 59 down to Freeport. State Highway 105, both east and west of 45. State Highway 146 in Galveston, Harris counties for the bookends to the segments we've already committed to. State Highway 242, both east and west of 45 in Montgomery County. On the FM system, again, these are our major, really principal thoroughfares, if that's a construction I can use, in our region. FM 646, a major corridor in Galveston County, 1097 in Montgomery County, 1463 in Fort Bend, 1488 in Montgomery, 1774 in Montgomery and Waller counties, and 2100 in Harris County, really east of Houston, major corridor in a developing area. So what does the funding look like that we're proposing to commit to or include in this 10-year plan? You can see the two columns with and without Proposition 7, and you can see the major effect that Proposition 7 has, programming at this time about $2.7 billion through that resource, and that's more than double the amount of funding that we would have if we're limited to resources. We'll note for you here, there's a small balance of funds, about $140 million, principally in Proposition 1 and Proposition 7 items. Under that scenario, we can basically fund all the projects on the highway side that we're comfortable through our process today, really respond to those 5 long-range plan goals: safety, congestion, access management, economic development, and environmental issues. We will be looking to come back to you with the recommendation from the TAC if Proposition 7 passes. There's one tweak here, but the recommendation from the TAC is really to approve the 10-year plan based on the Proposition 7 scenario, with a backup available there if Proposition 7 were not to pass. Should it pass, however, we would like to have the TIP subcommittee and TAC bring you some additional recommendations based on their funding eligibility and availability. We can move some of the funding sources around. Some projects that on the mobility side have federal funds committed to them today, we might be able to move those to the proposition side and put some additional federal funds into alternative modes. We'd like to come back to you with that recommendation probably next month should Proposition 7 pass. So your action today was really number 1, and we come back to you with number 2 next month. So with that, pause and see if there are any questions from the body.
Are there any questions, County Judge?
David, if you go back a couple of slides, right there, talks about Category 2 and Proposition 1. Have you done an analysis yet of what happens if there's no excess fund in the rainy day fund and Proposition 1 goes away? Because I had somebody yesterday say, oh, we're going to be flush with cash. And I went, no, not if Prop 1, because the way that was constructed, it's not a guaranteed source of funds.
That's correct. It is going to be very volatile. It'll be a resource that goes down and goes up as activity in the oil and gas sector fluctuates as well. We have not, as part of this, looked at the effect of what the comptroller came out with last week on those revised budget projections for the next 2 years. However, I would say right now it's a 10-year plan. All of it is subject to the availability of funds, even on the federal side, and we really want to have a list of priorities in place that we can work from. If some projects get delivered a few years later or a few years earlier, we at least will have that set of priorities in place and adopted to work from.
Any other questions? If not, can I have a motion based on the TAC recommendation? A second?
Second, I'll second that.
Discussion?
My only comment is we've met with Alan and David. They've done a great job, and we appreciate it. The criteria that the TAC is working off of I believe we need to make recommendations to look at the next call for projects and make sure that, mobility is a part of the grading, because, right now, 10,000 feet of flowers, probably is not what this board would put ahead of, mobility issues. So, but that's the criteria the TAC is having to work off of right now. But appreciate all the hard work they've done.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other discussion on it? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.